Night freezes on Doriath's borders, and the screams do not stop. Juan bleeds into trampled snow. Men with torches stumble backward as a wolf the size of a siege tower rises again, one paw flayed to bone, jaws blazing with stolen light. The air reeks of iron and burned fur. Then the beast turns from death and runs east, carrying in his throat a fire no darkness should endure. A like and subscription help these journeys into Middle-earth continue, and the comments are always open for where everyone is watching from tonight. The road is long, and many eyes gather beside it. Behind that fleeing shape, the hunt of the wolf broke apart in confusion. Beren, son of Barahir, lay dying with blood on his lips. Huan, greatest of hounds, had spent the last of his life and prophecy in tearing open the monster's breast. Mablung and the Marchwardens found the Silmaril freed at last, slick with black blood and burning clean in the grass, but their triumph froze before it could become speech. Carcharoth had fallen. All had seen it. Yet when the torches bent over Beren and the duel, the carcass convulsed, dragged itself on shattered forelimbs, and lurched into the dark like a nightmare refusing dawn. No song in later years agreed on what force moved him. Some said Morgoth's malice held the sinews together after life had gone. Some said the pain of the Silmaril had hollowed him so completely that death itself found no place to rest. What survives a bite from Juan and a lifetime of Angban's hate? In that hour, no one knew. They knew only that the snow steamed where he passed, and that the trees ahead shook as if a storm ran through them on 4 feet. Beren died before morning. Juan died beneath the cold stars. The Silmaril, cut free and washed, still went where fate had already driven it, and from that small mercy, the broad shape of history remained recognizable. Doriath mourned. Luthien sang over both the man and the hound. The great tales of the elder days still found their roads. But in the margins, in the places maps left pale, a new shadow began to move. Carcharoth did not flee far before the servants of Angband found him. They found him in a ravine north of the Esgolduin, half buried in churned earth, his ribs showing through the torn hide, his breath rattling like wind through broken gates. Orcs would not approach until whipped. Wolves would not approach at all, even dying. He bit through iron hooks and took an arm with him. Yet Morgoth had not bred him to be abandoned. He had once named him Chief of all Wolves, the Red Maw, the one beast in Middle-earth swollen with more malice than hunger. Humiliated by Luthien, by Beren, by a stolen jewel and a dead hand, Morgoth could not bear the loss of such an instrument. So smiths and sorcerers in the deep pits of Angband stitched iron into torn bone, packed his wounds with black fire, and laid chains across him that had held trolls screaming. There, under the furnaces of the north, Carcharoth endured. He healed badly. One eye clouded white. One shoulder remained higher than the other, forever twisted from Huan's bite. The scars made him more terrible. Pain became rhythm. Rage became wakefulness. He slept only in bursts, waking to snarl at shadows no one else could see. The Silmaril was gone, but its passage had left him marked. Great things of power called to him now with a scent sharper than blood. This would matter ages later when another ring of fire moved in secret through the world. Then came the War of Wrath. The skies of Beleriand cracked with thunder that was not weather. Rivers changed course. Towers folded into flame. The host of the west descended, and all the old certainties of Morgoth's kingdom began to break. For one day only, Carcharoth was unleashed again. Orcs pulled aside as he thundered from Angban's gates, collarless, maddened, vast as a moving hill. He tore through companies of elves and Edain alike. Spears snapped in his jaws. Horses died shrieking beneath him. But the West had not come unprepared. Great eagles stooped. One raked open his ruined eye. A spear from the Maya guard drove through his flank. He vanished into the smoke and ruin of the northern trenches. And when Thangorodrim was cast down and the earth opened, no body was found. That should have been his ending. It would have been enough for most dark things. Mountains were leveled. Seas rushed in. The old world drowned. Yet Carcharoth had always belonged less to places than to wounds. When Beleriand sank, he crawled into the broken roots of the northern earth and lived where nothing living should have found food, warmth, or mercy. The ages turned over him like weather over stone. In the Second Age, when the memory of Morgoth grew dim among men and sharpened into warning among the wise, there were still reports from the far north. Hunters vanished in snowfields without tracks leading away, and dwarves crossing high passes found carcasses of snow bears opened as if by siege engines. Once, near the Iron Mountains, long ruined and nameless, a company of Avari archers saw something immense pacing beneath the aurora. Its hide hung in strips, one eye milky, the other burning, embered. Their arrows struck and vanished as if loosed into a moving cliff of winter fur. Sauron heard those tales. He had fled ruin once before. He understood the usefulness of things that should have died and did not. He also understood danger. Carcharoth was not a troll to be yoked, nor a Nazgul to be enthralled by rings. He was older than Barad-dûr, older than the shaping of Mordor, older even than Sauron's open claim to dominion. The beast had been bred in Morgoth's shadow, and there remained in him a strain of defiance so savage that it resembled loyalty to nothing at all. What could Sauron do with a creature that had once swallowed a holy jewel and survived? For many centuries, nothing. He watched from afar. He fed legends northward. He let winter and hunger wear the beast thinner, crueler, more dependent on the scent of command. At last, near the end of the Second Age, when Sauron had forged his own dark empire and war spread from Mordor like mold through old grain, he sent black priests and wolf handlers to the wastes beyond the Grey Mountains. None returned whole. The third company returned with a chain and a story. They said the hound had descended on them at dusk without sound. They said it ignored meat, ignored horses, ignored men, until one among them raised a ring of power taken from a lesser servant. And then it came for the hand, not the man. Sauron listened, and from that moment his purpose changed. He did not seek to tame Carcharoth with kindness, because kindness had no door into that ruined mind. He did not seek merely to starve him, because hunger had become his nature. Instead, he forged a collar in the furnaces of Barad-dûr from black iron mixed with shards dredged from ancient northern ruin, and upon it he laid spells in the black speech and older words stolen from Angban's memory. The collar did not promise obedience, it promised direction. It gathered the beast's hatred and narrowed it like a spear point. When the last alliance came and Sauron was overthrown, the collar and the hound vanished together into shadow. That too should have ended the matter. Yet the Third Age was long, and evil is patient when it cannot be victorious. Far in the north, the remnants of Arnor learned the first truth of the old wolf. He came not as an army, but as weather. Farmsteads beneath the weather hills woke to find doors peeled from hinges, and all the livestock taken save one sheep left alive and trembling in blood-stiff wool. In the angle, rangers on watch heard a howl roll down the Horwell so deeply that ice cracked along the banks. Mothers there taught children to bank fires before moonrise, not because warmth would help, but because darkness felt less visible than flame. Then Angmar rose. The Witch King, Sauron's dead lieutenant, understood dread as a weapon of geometry. Fear, properly used, did not simply kill men. It emptied roads, split alliances, thinned harvests, soured sleep, and made every second defeat easier than the first. And in the hidden vaults of Carn Dum, he found records older than his realm, and in them the history of Morgoth's chief wolf, half myth, half warning. The Witch King did not smile, for such things no longer belonged to his face, but a colder delight entered his thought. Carcharoth was brought south by winter. No banner announced him. Snow did. Frost came early to the North Downs. Wolves multiplied in the Etten Moors. Then one night at Fornost, sentries on the outer wall heard a commotion below and laughed, thinking orcs had loosed cattle to confuse them. The laughter stopped when the gate trembled. A second blow came, and iron hinges screamed. A third, and timber burst inward in a shower of spikes and torch embers. Through the smoke came a head too large for any wolf in the world of sense, scarred muzzle gleaming, a black spittle steaming on stone. The battle for the city lasted until dawn, but the fall of hope lasted generations. Men who survived did not speak first of sorcery, or kings, or the black standards of Angmar. They spoke of breath. The hound's breath came before him, hot and carrion thick, and horses went blind with panic. They spoke of sound. They had heard wolves before and battle before, but this was a grinding, thunderous panting, as if a forge itself had learned to hunt. They spoke of light. Torches did not illumine him. They broke against him in orange shards, and where his shadow passed, men forgot for a heartbeat which way to run. Arnor still fell by stages, as it always had been fated to wither under division and war, but Carcharoth turned retreat into memory. Arthedain's survivors carried the tale west and south. In Bree, the innkeepers lowered their voices at the name. In the Shire, where little was known of elder darkness, strange stories reached even the green dragon in fragments. Sheep torn apart in one bite, rangers coming out of the wild with faces grey as if they had looked over the edge of time. Hobbits laughed uneasily and stirred the fire. They had no idea that the shadow crossing their songs had first run beneath the beaches of Doriath when the moon was young. Then Angmar was destroyed. The Witch King fled. Again, Carcharoth disappeared. That was Sauron's habit with the beast. He used him only when terror needed an old shape. Too much use invited unpredictability. Carcharoth hated restraint. He had killed handlers, mauled trolls, and once tore apart a wraith cloak carried too close to his face, as if some buried memory of masters offended him. He was not the kind of servant a Dark Lord trusted in daylight triumph. He was reserved for fractures, for sieges, for the hours just before lines broke. By the late Third Age, only the deepest lore kept his name alive. Elrond remembered. Galadriel remembered. Gandalf, whose memory ran back beyond many kingdoms of men, remembered enough to be troubled by rumors that came out of the north after Bilbo's quiet life was disturbed. Rangers found deer in the Trollshaws stripped not by feeding, but by frenzy. In the East Farthing, dogs barked at empty hills and would not leave their kennels by night. One winter morning in the North Farthing, a shepherd found all but one of his sheep dead in the snow, not eaten, only killed. The survivor had bitten through its own tether in terror and stood shaking with white foam on its lips. Aragorn saw the carcasses when he passed in secret through Eriador. He crouched by one, gloved hand on the frozen fleece, and studied the marks. They were not the work of ordinary wolves. The bite spread too wide. The bones had been crushed before the flesh was torn. He rose and stared north toward hills blue with distance and old secrets. When he came at last to Rivendell after Gandalf's return from Isengard, the wizard found him in the Hall of Fire long after midnight. The singers had gone. The embers were low. Rain tapped at the windows. "There is another hunter abroad," Gandalf said. Aragorn did not ask which. "From the north?" Gandalf nodded. "A name from the elder days has stirred. Elrond told it once beside a winter hearth, and the room seemed colder for the telling. Then imagine it under Sauron's command." Aragorn stood still for a long moment. "Can it be commanded?" Gandalf looked into the coals as if old battles moved there. Directed, not owned. Sauron will not loose it too soon. But if the ring moves where he can scent its trail, he will remember every tooth ever forged for darkness. At the council, when fear and argument circled the small plain ring on its chain, that warning entered the room like an unwelcome wind. Boromir frowned, impatient with ancient names. Gimli bristled at the thought that any beast might challenge dwarven endurance. But Elrond's face changed when Gandalf spoke the name aloud. "Carcharoth," said Elrond softly, and even the crackle of the hearth seemed to listen. "The Red Moor. Huan killed him." "Huan should have killed him," Gandalf answered. Yet something endured. Legolas felt the old forests inside his memory recoil. Why would Sauron wake such a thing now? "Because Nazgul inspire terror," said Gandalf. "But they do not love scent. This beast does. It once swallowed a Silmaril. Great powers burn in its memory. Could even the ring hide from a nose once burned by the light of Valinor?" Frodo said nothing. He only touched the ring through his pocket and felt, for the first time, not merely pursued, but sniffed. The Fellowship departed under winter stars, and for a while the world seemed to hold to its ordinary perils. Hollin was wide and empty. Caradhras was cruel. Moria was death in stone. Yet beyond every known danger, another line had begun to close. In the pits beneath Barad-dûr, Sauron had already sent the order. The collar was taken from its hooks. The chains heavier than anchor cables were unfastened. Far away, in a cavern where bones lay powdered beneath years of restless pacing, one red eye opened. Carcharoth came south like an avalanche finding valleys. He crossed the Brownlands at night. He forded the Anduin where lesser beasts would have drowned, emerging with sheets of black water sliding from his hide. Orc companies on the march flattened themselves against embankments as he passed. Some he ate, not because he needed food, but because fear smelled strongest just before bone broke. By the time the Fellowship reached Amon Hen, the old wolf was already in the eastern woods, moving with uncanny patience, his ruined shoulder rolling beneath a hide matted by centuries. The breaking of the Fellowship became bloodier in this telling. Boromir heard the first Uruk-hai before he saw them. The air was sharp with pine and winter river mist. Merry and Pippin were still near enough to hear his horn when it sounded, brave and clear among the trees. Arrows hissed, orcs shouted, steel struck wood. For a moment, the fight held its shape. Boromir stood against a slope and fought as the men of Gondor had always been taught to fight, with blade, shield, and refusal. He cut down the first Uruk, then the second. He took arrows and did not yield. Then the Uruks began to scatter. Even in their battle rage, they smelled what approached. Brush burst apart downslope. A black-grey mass crashed through the trees, silent until the last instant, when its jaws opened and the sound came out of it like a gate ripping from a wall. Boromir turned. He had time to understand only size. He struck once, and his sword glanced off iron-banded collar and scar. Carcharoth hit him with enough force to split the trunk behind him. The hobbits screamed. The horn fell from Boromir's hand. One more breath, one more attempt to rise, and the great jaws closed. When Aragorn found him later, there were no arrows left to count. There was only the broken horn, a trampled patch of leaves dark with blood, and prints in the mud so vast that even Gimli swore under his breath and looked over his shoulder, though daylight still held. Boromir was dead. The Uruks had taken Merry and Pippin in the confusion, and Carcharoth had gone east for a while before veering south again, as if another scent stronger than battle had turned him. That knowledge struck Aragorn harder than grief alone. "He is hunting Frodo," Legolas said. Aragorn's hand closed on the hilt of Anduril, and then every hour matters twice. So the chase began with more than one enemy before them. Across the plains of Rohan the three ran, and above them the weather darkened. They found not only orc spoor, but carcasses of wild horses, throats torn open and left steaming in the morning cold. In the Westfold, villagers saw smoke by dawn and thought it the work of raiders, only to find entire byres burst inward from outside. One old woman, standing barefoot in frost, told Gamling's riders that she had seen eyes beneath her orchard trees, like coals in a smithy, but much farther apart. Saruman heard those reports and coveted what he could not call. He sent warg riders north with bait, blood, and promises carried through dark craft. Few returned. Those who did had lost the wargs first. Whatever kinship ordinary wolves felt toward the monster, it was not loyalty, but worship mixed with dread. Saruman learned too late that some weapons did not fit his hand. His attempt to draw Carcharoth west only drove packs of lesser wolves into Rohan ahead of time, worsening the fear that already spread through villages and fold. Horses stamped and tore their tethers at dusk. Children woke crying to sounds their parents insisted were thunder. Far away, Frodo and Sam descended toward the dead marshes with Gollum as guide, and even there the hunt brushed them. On one bitter evening, the wind shifted from the northeast and brought a howl over water and rot. Frodo stopped where he stood. The dead faces beneath the pools seemed to listen. Gollum flinched so violently that he dropped to all fours. "What is it?" Sam whispered. Gollum's pupils were black pits in the dim light. "Old hunger," he hissed. "Not the riders. Worse, older. Runs and runs, yes." Frodo felt the ring grow suddenly heavy, not with malice, but with invitation. Something out there wanted what he carried in the same raw way starving creatures wanted meat. That was a more animal terror than the Nazgul inspired, and because it was animal, it felt closer. At Helm's Deep, the old wolf did not come, and for one night that absence was almost merciful. Yet even absent, he reshaped events. Refugees had been driven faster and from farther away. The roads were fuller. The smell of wet wool, horse sweat, and fear was thick under the Hornburg's walls. Among the defenders, whispers moved that something larger than any warg was abroad. When the assault began and Saruman's wolves hurled themselves against the outer works, men remembered those whispers, and every yellow eye in the rain seemed too large. After the victory, while Isengard drowned in its own ruined pride, Gandalf spoke plainly at last. He stood with Aragorn on the shattered causeway, dawn whitening the wreckage. Tree roots lifted stone nearby like fingers. In the distance, crows already circled battle's refuse. Sauron has turned an elder terror loose, Gandalf said. Not for conquest, for the ring. Aragorn looked south. Then he will draw it toward Mordor as a hound draws game. Yes, and if it finds Frodo before the mountain? Gandalf's expression hardened. Then the world may end by teeth instead of fire. Minas Tirith smelled the coming storm before it saw it. Tar, lamp oil, cold stone, and the endless human closeness of a city under siege mingled in the circles as men sharpened spears and women carried bundles downward to cellars. Bakers rose before dawn as always, though their hands shook. A boy on the 6th level leaned from a window and listened to the rambling arguments of geese in a courtyard below, because ordinary sounds felt precious when drums echoed from the east. Denethor sat with the Palantir and saw more than armies. He saw, racing through Morgul Vale ahead of the hosts, a shape like a wound in the earth. From that hour, his despair deepened into certainty. Faramir's retreat from Osgiliath became a slaughter. The river was black under cloud. Ruined arches stood above it like broken teeth. Men of Gondor fought house to house, hearing the Nazgul overhead and the tramp of Mordor's legions across the stones. Then a crash came from the eastern embankment, louder than siege hammers. Orcs scattered from their own advance. Carcharoth burst through smoke and masonry in a storm of debris. And suddenly, the defense was no longer a line, but a panic. He took 6 men in the first charge. A captain tried to turn his horse and was dragged screaming from the saddle so fast that only the boots remained in the stirrups. Faramir held longer than wisdom allowed, because the men behind him were not statistics, but sons of houses he knew, farmers' boys from Lossarnach, veterans from Pelagir, one grey-bearded archer whose daughter had just been betrothed. He nearly died for it, not from the beast's jaws, but from staying one command too long while men escaped a ruined lane. The wound that later carried him, pale and fevered, to the city came as he turned from a collapsed wall, his shield arm numb from shock and splinters. Behind him, Carcharoth slammed into a knot of retreating soldiers, and the riverbank became a crush of men, shields, and broken oars. The survivors never forgot the sound of those jaws meeting on empty stone after the last boat shoved away. So when the siege began in earnest and Grond rolled toward the Great Gate, Gondor faced not merely armies, but memory made flesh. Carcharoth prowled before the lines some nights, just beyond torch reach, his eye a red mote moving through the dark. Soldiers on the walls muttered prayers half-remembered from grandmothers who had lived near old northern refugees. Pippin heard those whispers and understood only fragments, but one phrase lodged in him: the wolf that had eaten light. Then the Rohirrim came. Their arrival should have shattered despair in one clean stroke, as in brighter tellings. Instead, it came through a field already poisoned by an older fear. The morning was cold and yellow with dust. The sound of horns rolled down from the north, like sea wind over grass. Riders of the Mark streamed over the Pelennor in a glitter of spearheads and horsemanes. Men wept on the walls to see them. Then Carcharoth rose from among the siege trenches. He had lain there in ash and canvas through the last dark hour, hidden not by subtlety, but by stillness, a mountain mistaken for earthworks. When the charge came, he erupted toward the horses' flank. The front ranks swerved. Several mounts reared and threw their riders before steel met flesh. The smell hit the Rohirrim like a blow. Blood, wet fur, grave pit heat. Snowmane screamed. Theoden, old but unbroken, hauled his horse into line and cried for the charge again, his voice cutting through dread by sheer kingly habit. What chance had doors and flesh before such hunger? Very little. Yet courage is not measured against what is likely to win. Eomer rode at Carcharoth with 3 of the king's guard and thrust for the throat. The spear slid against iron collar and shattered. One rider disappeared beneath a forepaw. Another horse went over backwards, neck broken. Theoden himself would have met the beast then, and perhaps died under him, had not a flight of arrows from the city wall and the sudden onrush of men from Dol Amroth checked the wolf half a heartbeat. That heartbeat was enough to save a king and doom him later by other means. For while Carcharoth raged against the Rohirrim, the Witch King ranged elsewhere, and thus the shape of the battle twisted rather than broke. Men died in clusters. Mumakil ran wild. The sky blackened with wings, and still the old wolf tore a corridor through shield walls that might have held against trolls. It seemed for a while that Gondor and Rohan would both be devoured together in a single red morning. Then, black ships came up the Anduin. Despair changed faces twice on the walls before noon. First to horror, then to disbelief. The banner unfurled on the lead ship was not the Red Eye, but the White Tree and Stars. Aragorn leaped ashore with the Dunedain and the men of the south who had turned to his service. Hope, when it returns suddenly, can be violent. Gondor surged outward. The battle reformed around a fresh center. Aragorn sought first not a captain, not a banner, but a shape moving through broken horse lines beyond the city ditch. He found it in a haze of dust and sun glare, standing over the body of a fallen rider, breath pumping, hide striped with old scars and fresh arrow shafts. For one instant, man and beast regarded one another across ages. Then Aragorn raised Anduril, Flame of the West renewed, and Carcharoth recognized in that blade not a memory, but a kindred threat. Their meeting lasted only moments, and yet songs would have made it longer if songs had been equal to truth. The beast lunged. Aragorn rolled aside from jaws that could have taken him from shoulder to hip. Anduril bit into the scarred foreleg, and black blood sprayed the trampled grass. Legolas sent arrows into the ruined eye socket. Gimli hacked at the iron collar when the beast swung past him, sparks flying from dwarf-forged steel striking Sauron's work. Carcharoth recoiled, not defeated, but insulted into greater wrath. Then, from far away, from the heart of Mordor itself, another command reached him. The ring had entered the Dark Land. He stopped in the middle of slaughter, as if listening to something under the world. Men thought at first that some wound had finally mastered him. Then he turned, abandoning battle, and ran east. Not toward safety, toward purpose. That abrupt departure saved the Pelennor. Without it, perhaps the line would still have broken. Perhaps Theoden would have fallen under fur and iron instead of beneath the Black Captain. Perhaps Eomer would have died trying to avenge both king and horse. The field had balanced on one monster's choice, and that choice belonged not to honor, nor fear, nor even strategy, but to appetite sharpened by command. Across the ashen plains of Mordor, Frodo and Sam felt none of the relief that spread behind them in Gondor. Their world had narrowed to thirst, dust, and effort. The air tasted of metal and old volcanic bitterness. Light came thin through the fumes by day and vanished quickly at evening, leaving the land to a dim red gloom. Orc companies moved in the distance like dark insects. Somewhere behind them, Gollum still crept, patience and spite in equal measure. Then the earth began to tremble in irregular beats. At first, Sam thought it artillery or thunder imprisoned beneath the plain. But the tremors grew rhythmic, and once, far off on a ridge of slag, he saw a shape blot out a patch of sullen sky and vanish again. Orcs nearby heard it too. One company broke ranks and fled without waiting for orders, glancing back over shoulders with the kind of terror that strips obedience bare. Gollum chose that moment to reveal a truth he had hoarded. "Hound comes," "Nay," he whispered from a crack in the rocks, his voice thin with glee and fear. "Great hound, yes, master's hound, smells the precious, smells it, smells it. Let it take the fat hobbit, let it take the thief, and Smeagol will have the precious after." There was betrayal in that, but also revelation. Sauron had not merely sent armies to his own land's borders. He had loosed a single ancient certainty into the wilderness to sweep all chance aside. Frodo heard and felt a calm more terrible than panic settle over him. There would be no hiding now. Every step toward the fire was also a step toward Jaws. By the time they reached Samath Nar, the mountain groaned around them. The chambers within Orodruin pulsed with furnace light. Stone sweated heat. The cracks between paving slabs glimmered red like veins. Frodo climbed the last slope, bent nearly double. Sam behind him, and all the old burdens of the quest seemed to press into this one airless chamber. At the brink, where doom and salvation were one narrow edge apart, the ring mastered what remained of his strength. He claimed it. The words were small beside the noise of the mountain, yet they changed everything. Frodo stood straight for the first time in days, a figure lit by fire from below and put on the ring. In that instant, Sauron knew. Across Mordor, the Dark Tower stiffened into attention. The Nazgul wheeled, and racing through the outer tunnels, claws striking sparks from stone, came the oldest hunter in his service. Gollum struck first, as greed required. He sprang from the dark, grappled with an invisible body, bit, and fell backward with Frodo's finger and the ring in his hands. He capered, laughing his awful laugh, half-mad with triumph. For one heartbeat, the ending might still have resembled the tale long remembered. Then Carcharoth burst into the chamber. Heat rolled off him. His hide was blistered by the mountain's throat. The iron collar glowed along its runes. One eye was white ruin, the other a furnace spark fixed wholly on the ring in Gollum's hand. Sam shouted and threw himself between beast and master, but the hound barely saw him. Frodo, on his knees, bleeding, looked up through pain and smoke, and saw in that scarred muzzle an echo so ancient it seemed to come from another age's stars. The same appetite that had once leaped for a Silmaril on the hand of Beren. When the end came, was it fate or appetite that leapt first? In Middle-earth, those two often wear the same face. Gollum shrieked and fled along the lip of the fire, clutching his prize to his breast. Carcharoth lunged. Sam slashed at the beast's flank and cut deep, but not deep enough. Frodo reached with his maimed hand and caught only air. Gollum turned, backlit by the abyss, his joy already becoming fear as the shadow fell over him. Then jaws closed, not on the hand alone this time, but on Gollum entire. For a single, impossible second, Carcharoth stood at the brink with the ring inside him. Once, long before, he had carried a Silmaril in his belly and been driven mad by holy fire. Now he bore the ruling ring, engine of Sauron's will, and the two histories met inside the same cursed flesh. The collar flared white, the beast convulsed. A sound tore out of him, unlike any howl heard before, a cry of rage, pain, command, and refusal, all fused into one world-shaking note. Sauron sought to seize him utterly in that moment. Morgoth's old breeding fought back with blind savagery. The ring burned to return to its maker. The old wound of the Silmaril answered as if Scar remembered flame. Carcharoth lost balance. He twisted, clawed at the rock, raked molten stone down in a shower. Sam flung himself at Frodo and dragged him clear as the beast toppled over the edge. For a breath, his vast body hung against the red gulf, iron collar blazing, jaws working soundlessly around an evil too great to swallow and too near to spit. Then he fell into the fire with Gollum and the ring, and Orodruin answered like a god in pain. Relief came first as shock. The Tower of Barad-dûr shuddered. The hosts before the Morannon wavered, as if the very air had changed weight. Nazgûl screamed and were gone. Across the Pelennor, men who had survived the battle looked east and saw a darkness they had mistaken for permanent begin to tear apart from within. Wind rushed down from the Ifil-Duath, carrying ash, heat, and something cleaner beneath both. For one brief stretch of heartbeats, Middle-earth breathed out. Then the mountain opened wider. Fire fountained from its crown. Rivers of molten rock split the wounded plain. The armies of Mordor broke and ran, trampled by their own panic. At the Black Gate, Aragorn and his captains saw the land itself unmake the power that had mastered it. They had won. It was over. And yet, in victory, there remained a single black thread of unease, because some among the wise knew what had fallen into that fire with the ring. Frodo and Sam were borne out by Grace and Eaglewing, half senseless, caked in ash, each carrying wounds no herb would close. Frodo's missing finger was not the only mark he kept. In fever afterward, he muttered of breath hot as forge air, of claws on stone, of an eye in the dark that had known him by scent rather than name. Sam, who loved plain earth and growing things, found for many years that sudden barking at night tightened his chest before reason could answer. There are victories the body believes before the mind, and other victories the body never fully believes at all. In Minas Tirith, the bells rang. In Rohan, songs were made. Children born the next spring heard only the gentler versions, the kind where evil gathers neatly into one tower and falls when the tower does. But ordinary people remembered details songs forgot. A baker in the fourth circle remembered how flour dust trembled from his shelves when the great wolf struck the outer works. A shepherd in Westfold remembered that his dogs never again faced east on winter nights. A ranger in the north, hearing of Mordor's fall, sat beside a lonely fire and whispered thanks for an enemy he had once thought no age could bury. Aragorn, crowned at last, ordered the annals amended. "Let nothing be softened," he said. "Let the old darkness be named, not because naming glorified it, but because forgetting invited repetition." In the archives of the reunited kingdom, scribes wrote beside the accounts of the Ringwar that an elder terror of the First Age had walked again and perished in the fire with the ring. Gandalf approved the record, though not without a long silence. One evening in Ithilien, though under leaves, just recovering from war smoke, Aragorn asked him the question many had avoided. Is he ended? Gandalf watched the new green lift in the evening wind. Sauron is ended. The ring is ended. As for the hound, fire destroys much, but not always all. The wizard's eyes were old with memories of worlds younger than trees. The oldest evils were never truly Sauron's. He borrowed them, pointed them, and hoped they would not turn. That was always his weakness. He mistook use for mastery. Legolas, nearby, laid a hand on a beech sapling's smooth bark. No song of the woodland will grieve that creature. No, said Gandalf, but every age should remember what hunger becomes when power teaches it purpose. So the world was remade in light, but not in innocence. The Shire healed with astonishing stubbornness. Barley rose golden again. The smoke curled from round doors at dusk. Children raced lanes where no shadow larger than a cart passed. Yet now and then, under a red harvest moon, the dogs of Hobbiton would stop their barking all at once and stare east in shared silence until someone laughed too loudly and shut the shutters. Rohan kept horses from certain battlefields where the grass had grown back green, but the roots ran deep through old blood. Gondor rebuilt Osgiliath with stones hauled by men who told stories to steady their hands when the river mists thickened after sunset. In the north, rangers still walked the cold lands with more watchfulness than before, because they above all knew that some things from elder days leave descendants not of blood, but of fear. And in Mordor, where ruins settled slowly and the ash took years to cool, searchers found almost nothing of the beast. No skull, no fang, no blackened mountain of bone. Only a stretch of glassed stone near a crack above the Samath Nar, whitened as if by heat fiercer than the mountain's own, and half-sunk in fused slag, an iron collar split from within. That was enough for relief. It was not enough for peace. For even in the Fourth Age, when the kings returned, and the White Tree flowered and the names of heroes were set in marble, there remained this dark lesson threading through memory. Evil does not always come newest from the newest tyrant. Sometimes it comes ancient, half forgotten, carrying wounds older than kingdoms, and serves the present only until its deeper hunger wakes. Sauron fell because he believed all malice would bend toward his design. Carcharoth had obeyed for centuries. But in the final instant, he proved what the wise had long suspected. Hunger serves no master forever. It devours the hand that points, the prey it seeks, and at last itself. Yet that final comfort did not wholly quiet the heart. Mountains keep echoes. Ash keeps prints longer than rain should allow. And far above the ruined plain of Gorgoroth, when moonlight touches that broken collar, the metal still steams as though some throat beneath the earth is breathing in the dark.